We're the ones who failed to save the children. We're the ones they've been calling to over and over again.
This place wants us scared. It wants us fighting each other instead of fighting back. We stand together, we stay focused, and we keep fighting until we find a way out.
First episode. Think about that for a second. John Griffin himself once said that episode 1 already contains most of the answers to the entire story. At first, that sounds impossible. How could a single pilot episode explain monsters, the boy in white, the faraway trees, the strange symbols, the children, the man in yellow, and everything we've learned over 4 seasons? But after going back and watching the pilot again, something started to feel different. Scenes that once looked simple suddenly carried a completely different meaning. Small conversations became warnings. Character introductions became clues. Even the very first death in the series feels less like a shocking opening and more like the foundation of everything the show has been trying to tell us. The deeper you look, the more it feels like the writers were never making things up as they went along. Instead, they were quietly building one giant puzzle from the very beginning. And if that's true, then maybe we've been looking for answers in the wrong place this entire time. Maybe the key to season 5 isn't hidden somewhere ahead of us. Maybe it's been sitting right in front of us since episode 1. And once you notice these connections, it's almost impossible to unsee them. Let's go all the way back to where everything began. Before the mystery grew larger, before we met the children, before anyone talked about cycles, reincarnation, or the man in yellow. Episode 1 introduces us to a town that seems completely impossible, but if you strip away the horror, what remains is actually a story about choice. Every major character who enters the town is forced to make a decision almost immediately. Some choose hope, some choose denial, others refuse to believe what is right in front of them. Looking back now, that pattern never changed. Every season simply repeated the same idea using different characters. The monsters aren't always the real danger. Sometimes the real danger is believing the wrong story. That idea appears within the first few minutes of the pilot. The Matthews family refuses to accept that they're trapped. Jim believes there must be a logical explanation. Tabitha keeps searching for a practical answer. Julie tries to stay calm even though nothing around her makes sense. Ethan is the only one who almost accepts the impossible immediately because children often see the world differently. That contrast feels incredibly important now because throughout the series, the people who survive the longest are usually the ones willing to question reality instead of forcing reality to fit their expectations. Maybe that's exactly what episode 1 was trying to teach us before we even realized it. Then there is the fallen tree. Most people see it as nothing more than the beginning of the journey. But what if the tree is much more than that? Think about how every single person who arrives in the town first encounters that tree blocking the road. It isn't simply an obstacle. It represents a choice. Turn around or continue forward. Everyone who ends up trapped makes the exact same decision. They leave the tree behind and continue searching for another path. Ironically, that decision is what seals their fate. The show never forces anyone into the town. The characters walk into the trap themselves because they believe another road must exist. That's fascinating because the entire series keeps repeating this exact lesson. Characters constantly believe there's another way out, another shortcut, another answer, another escape. But every attempt leads them deeper into the mystery. Maybe the tree isn't just a physical object. Maybe it's the first test. The first moment the town asks a question without speaking. How badly do you want certainty? And how far are you willing to go to find it? Looking at season 4, that question feels even more relevant than ever. Every discovery came with a cost. Every answer opened 2 new mysteries. The town never gives knowledge for free. Another detail that feels impossible to ignore is the crows. They appear before the family even understands they're in danger. At first, they simply create an unsettling atmosphere. But From rarely places anything on screen without a reason. Birds have appeared throughout the series during moments of transition, warnings, and major changes. Could the crows represent something watching the newcomers, or are they signaling that another cycle has officially begun? The show has hinted several times that history repeats itself. Different people, same story, different faces, and same choices. If that's true, then the crows may not be random at all. They may be witnesses, silent observers that appear whenever the game begins again. What's interesting is that the pilot never explains them. Just like so many other details, it simply places them in front of us and quietly moves on. Only years later do we begin asking why they were there in the first place. That's classic From. The show doesn't hide clues by making them invisible. It hides them by making them seem ordinary. And once the larger picture starts coming together, ordinary moments suddenly become some of the biggest revelations in the entire story. Even Ethan's story about the Lake of Tears deserves another look. Most viewers originally dismissed it as a child's fantasy, something meant to reflect Ethan's imagination. But after everything we've witnessed over 4 seasons, can we really say that anymore? Time and time again, children's stories in From have carried pieces of the truth. Victor's drawings, the nursery rhymes, the strange symbols, the stories passed between generations, none of them were meaningless. They were fragments of history disguised as imagination. So when Ethan speaks about quests, monsters, and places beyond ordinary understanding in episode 1, maybe the writers weren't just introducing his personality, maybe they were quietly introducing the mythology of the entire series. If John Griffin truly meant that episode 1 contains the answers, perhaps the biggest mistake we've made as viewers is assuming the clues needed to look complicated. Instead, the truth may have been hidden inside the simplest conversations all along. And once you begin looking at the pilot through that lens, every single scene starts feeling less like the beginning of a television show and more like the opening chapter of a story whose ending was already being whispered from the very first moment. One detail that keeps pulling me back to episode 1 is something that almost everyone overlooks because it happens so naturally. It's not a monster attack. It's not the tree in the road. It's not even the first death. It's the way every character reacts to the impossible. Think about it. The pilot isn't just introducing people, it's separating them into different groups without telling us that's what's happening. Some characters immediately trust what they're being told, others reject it completely. Some become obsessed with finding answers, others simply try to survive one more day. Doesn't that sound familiar? 4 seasons later, those same categories still exist. Boyd keeps choosing responsibility, even when it destroys him emotionally. Jade can't stop chasing the truth, even when every answer costs him another piece of his sanity. Victor survives by holding on to memories that nobody else understands. Tabitha refuses to stop searching for the children. It's almost like episode 1 wasn't introducing characters at all, it was introducing roles, and if that's true, then maybe every cycle has people filling these same positions over and over again. Different faces, but the exact same story. That would explain why the town feels strangely prepared whenever new people arrive. It already knows who everyone will become before they even realize it themselves. Maybe that's why the town never seems surprised. It's seen this story unfold countless times before. Now let's connect this idea to one of the biggest mysteries in the entire series, the repeated theme of stories. Episode 1 introduces Ethan as a child who constantly talks about quests, heroes, monsters, and impossible worlds. At first, Jim treats those stories like harmless fantasies. Julie rolls her eyes. Everyone assumes Ethan is simply trying to escape reality after the accident. But what if the opposite is true? What if Ethan understands reality better than anyone else because he hasn't learned to reject impossible ideas yet? Throughout the series, we've watched children become central to the mythology. The boy in white doesn't communicate through logic. The trapped children don't explain things with science. Everything comes through symbols, stories, drawings, songs, and memories. It's almost as if the town itself speaks in the language of imagination instead of facts. Looking back, Ethan's role in episode 1 suddenly feels much bigger. Maybe the writers weren't giving us comic relief through a child with an active imagination. Maybe they were teaching us how the mystery itself works. If you try solving from using only logic, you'll always fall behind. But if you start treating every story as a piece of history disguised as fiction, suddenly dozens of scenes begin connecting together. Then there's Boyd. we often focus on him because he's the sheriff, the leader, the man who refuses to give up. But go back and watch his very first appearance. What is Boyd doing? He's trying to hold together a town that's already falling apart. He isn't solving the mystery. He isn't hunting monsters. He's maintaining order. That's an important distinction. Season after season, Boyd spends more time protecting people than uncovering the truth. At first, that seems like simple character development. But what if that's another repeating pattern? Maybe every cycle has someone whose purpose isn't to escape. Their purpose is simply to keep the cycle alive long enough for the next chapter to begin. That's a disturbing thought because it would mean Boyd has unknowingly been serving the town instead of defeating it. Every time he saves lives, he also preserves the game. Every rule he enforces keeps people alive just long enough to continue playing their assigned roles. The town needs survivors, it needs hope, it needs leaders. Without them, the cycle ends too quickly. Suddenly, Boyd's greatest strength may also be the thing the town depends on the most. This idea becomes even more interesting when you compare Boyd to Jade. Episode 1 presents them as complete opposites. Boyd believes in responsibility. Jade believes in intelligence. Boyd trusts experience. Jade trusts logic. Boyd focuses on protecting people. Jade focuses on solving puzzles. Yet somehow, both paths keep leading to the same place. Neither man has escaped. Neither man fully understands what's happening. It's almost like the town intentionally creates opposing personalities because conflict generates movement. One character asks questions while another keeps everyone alive long enough for those questions to matter. Remove either one and the story collapses. That's why I think episode 1 quietly establishes something much bigger than individual characters. It establishes balance. Every major figure represents a different response to the unknown: fear, hope, curiosity, acceptance, denial, faith, logic, and those responses continue shaping every decision long after the pilot ends. Another connection that becomes impossible to ignore is the repeated focus on memory. At first, memory seems like Victor's storyline. He's the man who remembers things nobody else can. But the deeper the series goes, the more memory becomes everyone's problem. Characters forget dreams, they ignore warnings, they dismiss visions, entire histories disappear, conversations are lost. Even the town itself feels like a place where memories become fragmented over time. Now go back to episode 1. The pilot constantly asks viewers to pay attention without directly saying so. Small details appear once and then vanish. Strange conversations seem insignificant until seasons later. It's almost like the audience experiences the same problem as the characters. We forget what mattered because we didn't know it mattered yet. That's brilliant storytelling if it's intentional. The writers aren't just telling us about forgotten memories, they're making us experience forgotten memories. Years later, we return to the pilot and suddenly realize the clues were always there. We simply weren't ready to recognize them. And then there's one final detail that I honestly can't stop thinking about. Every single newcomer who arrives in the town immediately starts searching for an exit. Nobody stops to ask a different question. Instead of asking, how do we escape? Maybe they should have been asking, why were we brought here? Those are two completely different questions. One assumes escape is the goal. The other assumes purpose exists. Episode 1 never actually tells us the town wants people trapped forever. That's an assumption the characters make because of fear. But what if the town has always been trying to lead certain people towards something? Not because it's good and not because it's evil, but because every cycle requires specific events to happen in a specific order. If that's true, then the pilot isn't simply the beginning of the Matthews family's nightmare. It's the beginning of another carefully arranged sequence that has happened many times before, and perhaps that's exactly what John Griffin meant. Episode 1 didn't hide the answers through impossible riddles or secret codes. It hid them in plain sight, inside ordinary conversations, repeated behaviors, and choices that seemed completely normal. Only after 4 seasons can we finally see the pattern beginning to emerge. And if this theory is even partially correct, then season 5 may not introduce an entirely new mystery at all. Instead, it may reveal that everything we've been watching since the pilot has always been the same story, but told from a different angle. There's one last connection that I think could completely change the way we look at From, and it goes back to something John Griffin said about the pilot holding most of the answers. What if episode 1 wasn't simply introducing the story? What if it was showing us how the story ends? The first episode begins with people arriving in a town they don't understand, believing they can solve everything through logic. 4 seasons later, those same characters have learned that logic alone isn't enough.